When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about George R.R. Martin's latest Not-a-Blog post. It's the one I feel like a lot of people were waiting for, myself included. I wasn't sure how much we were actually going to get in his Not-a-Blog about House of the Dragon. And weirdly enough, I don't even think this was the only one that he planned to give us. Now that we've, seen him take it down and there's been some drama between him and HBO, I don't expect to get some of the other Not-a-Blogs, but I feel like this is only the opening to what he wanted to say about House of the Dragon. And so I'm going to go over it for you guys in this video if you guys haven't heard the news, which you guys probably have if you've seen the live stream, but I want to give more of my kind of detailed thoughts, talk about it, and what it could possibly mean for the future of A Song of Ice and Fire shows. But before we get into it, if you did want to become a Patreon or a member, you do get videos early, and I do get an exclusive video for you guys each week. So consider that if you enjoy my content or just want more of my stuff. But let's get into it. So the basic, summed up version of what the Not-a-Blog is it was this idea where George R. R. Martin is looking at some of the issues that he had of House of the Dragon. And he specifically really only talks about one, but he talks about Blood and Cheese quite extensively in this first Not-a-Blog. He actually doesn't even mention any of the episodes from 5 through 8. He only really mentions episode 1, and then also says he liked episode 2 as well. And he talks extensively about the changes between Blood and Cheese from the book and Blood and Cheese from the show. So if you guys go back, the video I basically made, talking about the differences, is basically what George does in this Not-a-Blog. He details the differences. And his main criticism was Maelor, who is the son of Helena and Aegon, was also supposed to be in the Blood and Cheese moment. It was supposed to be Helena picking between two sons. And George talks extensively in the blog post about how that might not seem major, because even the casual audience and even myself, I said it was fine, right? I thought it could have been better, but it was still good enough. It did its job, right? And so George goes in here and talks about how, yes, maybe it worked here, but now there's maybe an issue that you have later on. How do you finish things like what Maelor's plot, leads to, right? Maelor's plot leads to a lot of other things. Maelor himself is not that important of a character, but things that happen because of his, future death and the actions that come with the character, it's really huge. And this video will have spoilers for the future seasons. So, if you are worried about spoilers for the next season, I really would, not watch this video, because it is going to talk about spoilers, because George himself spoils things to come in season 3, and he also talked a little bit more about the actual seasons. But to sum it up, Maelor's death, for George and what he explains, he says that, again, Maelor's death and also Jaehaerys' death are really the thing that tips Helena over. You have how that fallout occurs and gets the public to be all riled up against Rhaenyra, blaming her and thinking that, the Blacks actually killed her. All of this different stuff happens because of one moment that happens in season 2, or in Blood and Cheese. And so he talks about this being such a small thing that has a huge ramification. He talks about this butterfly effect quite extensively in his actual blog post. And so I just kind of summed it up for you guys, but he goes into a lot more detail that I don't think really is necessary for this video. But the point of it, and the thing I took away from it, is that George is realizing that some of these small things that they're changing are having huge issues for the seasons going forward, and even had issues in this season himself. And so there's part of it where you have to kind of read into what you think he's actually saying but not saying, because he doesn't even really fully give his thoughts in season 2. He really just gives his thoughts on things that he'd already talked about, the episode 1 and 2. And so for me, the way I came out of it is I looked at it, and then George is kind of giving a cry for help, is almost the way I saw it. Is I think, you've seen all this talk over the last couple of weeks that he's been very frustrated. One of his prior blog posts talks about adaptation and how some of these, companies and these shows are not doing justice to the material. And so I look at that as in Rings of Power, The Witcher, things like that. They strayed too far away from what the, original author intended them to be. And I think George is now seeing that in House of the Dragon after Game of Thrones has already done that. And so I think a part of this is, George remembering and maybe not even never forgiving Game of Thrones for what happened to it in HBO. And you think about it, George has never really talked about Game of Thrones. He doesn't go in on it. He never was able to have this moment where he criticized it a lot. He really stopped talking about Game of Thrones after like the early parts of season 2 as a whole. And so when you think about that and you apply this here, what has George so angry that he's willing to publicly criticize House of the Dragon, publicly criticize Ryan Condal, and reveal things that probably shouldn't have been made public? And I want to make that very clear. In my opinion, George has every right to have the thoughts that he does. I agree with everything he said in his blog post. But I think this should have been handled privately. And I know we talked about this on stream. So for those people that were in my stream or even with me and Ricky on his stream, maybe this was something that George wanted the public to know to turn the public sway, against HBO and Ryan Condal so that they would, take his work more seriously and be more faithful to the adaptation. But who knows, right? Maybe I don't think I'm in that camp. I can see the rationale, but I personally think that George was just overcome by emotion and anger and sadness and stress. He's been talking about those things for this whole year, right? This has not been a good year for George. His last blog post at the very end, he talked about that, how this has been a bad year for him, very stressful, depressing, all these things because all these different people that he knows are dying, and it's really sad. And George, to me, finally just had enough. He lashed out. I think this was probably a lapse in judgment as it was deleted right after. Maybe that was because HBO did, or maybe George realized it was a mistake, whatever you want to say. I personally just think that he let his emotions get the best of him and he wanted to air out his grievances. And I can't fault him for wanting to do that. I personally probably wouldn't have handled it in this way, but I can't fault the man for doing this. I think House of the Dragon Season 2 wasn't very good. It destroyed a lot of the fundamental core themes and things of the dance and of Fire and Blood as a whole. And I think George had enough of it. He ends out this blog post, which I think is the most important part of the blog post, saying that this is only one major issue or toxic issue that's occurred. If Ryan Condal and the team go forward with some of the things that they're contemplating right now, season 3 and 4 are going to have even more major butterflies or changes to the source material. And there's even a part in this that I think is so telling, is that it appears that George R.R. Martin was lied to about Maelor. When George was, talking about Blood and Cheese and he was giving feedback to Ryan Condal, he asked about this. He asked about Maelor and where he was going to be. And Ryan Condal kind of seems to brush him off, saying that, oh yeah, he'll be, introduced later on in the season. He'll be kind of more of just like a newborn baby type situation. That never occurred. And George R. R. Martin, it seems, was never informed of that. He had to kind of find out like we did. And so if you're George, you feel like you were lied to, those things, and that his, word and his criticism didn't mean anything because the team didn't change any of those things and they just kept going. And so I think you look at this and it's a mixture of George feeling betrayed. It's, being disappointed by some of the things going on, some of his old issues he might have with HBO and Game of Thrones when, that started to go away from his source material as well. And, some people are saying, that this doesn't mean George doesn't, not like season 2 or whatever. I think it does. I mean, think about the way he's talking in this entire blog post, right? He says in terms of what they're going to do with the Maelor plot going forward and all those things that don't seem to be able to be done, he basically says he has no idea, and he has no idea if Ryan Condal has any plans as to what they're going to do with the Maelor plot from the book. That's very telling. It tells me that George has completely lost any type of faith or relationship with Ryan Condal because even Ryan Condal doesn't know what he's doing with these things, and George doesn't know either. So I think it comes to this point where George was so done with this relationship that he went public with it. He never did that with D&D. Think about that. Even after season 8 ended and, he might have had his gripes with it, he still gave a very, politically correct statement about the show. Even if you think about past N+A or R+L videos I've done in the past, one of the Naughty that I reference is actually right after season 8 ended, and it's him talking about, his first sit down with D&D about doing his world and who the parents of Jon Snow were. He was still saying those things right after season 8 came out, right? He has never been somebody that's publicly been criticizing things until now. That's why this is so important for you guys to understand and why I think it's much larger than maybe I thought it was even before this blog post came out. I didn't expect George to go in as deep as he did, right? He straight up says in this post that in season 3, Helena is going to die for basically nothing, from what he can tell. Does that sound like he's very positive going into the next seasons? I don't know how you like look at season 2 and go, yeah, George doesn't hate it. George has said nothing. He hasn't congratulated the season for ending. He hasn't said, oh, how good these episodes are. After episode 4, he went radio silent, right? After episode 4, George has not like said anything nice about those episodes. And that's very different because in the first 4 episodes of this show, he was kind of congratulating them yet, right? He said, nice things about Rook's Rest. He went on a little tangent about dragons and all that stuff. But I think there's a couple root issues that he has come to. The Maelor plot seems to be almost completely cut. Nettles, one of, I think, his very favorite characters, who we already kind of hinted at was he had a major problem with in this blog post he's done in the past. Nettles is going to be gone, it seems like. Daemon, now we don't know what his interpretation of Daemon is through this season, but it seems like if you're going off of my interpretation, Daemon and Alicent were butchered in this season. Rhaenyra is nowhere close to the same character that she is in the book. It feels like the fracturing of like HBO and George R.R. Martin. That's what it feels like. Because even after the blog post was taken down, HBO kind of gives this very, politically correct statement. Let me read it out to you guys. HBO states that there are few greater fans of George R.R. Martin and his book Fire and Blood than his creative team on House of the Dragon, both in production and at HBO. Commonly, when adapting a book for the screen, with its own format and limitations, the showrunner ultimately is required to make difficult choices about the characters and stories the audience will follow. We believe that Ryan Condal and his team have done an extraordinary job, and the millions of fans the series has amassed over the first 2 seasons will continue to enjoy it. Very politically correct statement. Didn't really address the drama really at all. They just kind of said something, just to say something. If you even think about something that's come out with Ryan Condal and he was doing this kind of interview on a podcast type situation, he seems to almost like take a shot at book fans or Fire and Blood specifically that, oh, it's just history and that it's not really like a definitive version of what things happened, and that it almost makes it feel like House of the Dragon is the definitive way of which these things happen and that he is like the archetype of it. It's like, no, George R.R. Martin would have put the answer into Fire and Blood. We're just not sure which one is the answer. There are multiple times in this show where they've added in things that could not feasibly happen in Fire and Blood. If you want to say that your world is different canon than Fire and Blood, that is fine, right? That's your own canon. It's already how I view it. I view House of the Dragon as its own like canon. It's not Fire and Blood anymore. It's nowhere near there. Okay, that's fine, right? It's kind of like Rings of Power with the Silmarillion. It has no connection at all. 2 different things. Fine. But it's just this, it seems like lack of communication, lack of understanding. I just think George R.R. Martin feels like he was backed into a corner. That's the way I would feel. Where it's happening twice now, where his source material is not being adapted correctly and not faithfully at all. And I think this one hurts more because I think Ryan Condal, everything that came out about him before this show started was that he was a fan of the book series and wanted to give a faithful adaptation, and that's just not been the case. I mean, for as much as we want to say in season 1, I think there were some really good changes. There was also some really bad changes in season 1, notably Rhaenys and Joffrey's death and all that stuff. Like, there were some changes in there that were more acceptable because the overall narrative of season 1 was pretty good. It was just these little mishaps here and there, and that kind of exploded in season 2, right? We had mishap after mishap after mishap in this, but mainly in the second half of the season, but there were still some questionable things. Blood and Cheese, kind of questionable. Episode 2, really good, no real complaints. Episode 3, Alicent and Rhaenyra's meeting, horrible, probably the worst sequence of House of the Dragon. Episode 4, again, pretty good, probably top 5 episode of House of the Dragon. And then episode 5, questionable, completely split the fan base on what they thought of it. Episode 6, same thing. Episode 7, I would say most people liked it. I was not one of those people. And then episode 8 seems overall everybody was disappointed by it. So I think if you're George, it's just a combination of holding in a bunch of feelings and it all exploded. That's what happened, in my opinion, I give this reference multiple times today. I'm recording this after doing the 2 streams. But it seems like if you get a YouTube comment and it's a nasty comment to you and you want to respond to it, you get angry, you get all worked up, you type out something, and then you pause right before you're about to send it and you go, is it worth putting this out there? You know, like what good does this do me? Right? And then you delete that comment, you vented your feelings, and you move on with your life. George pressed the sent button. He didn't delete it, right? It's what he probably should have done, right? He should have typed out all those feelings and all those things. I don't think he should have made this public. I think this should have been happening behind closed doors. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this latest Not a Blog post. I am someone that's, I think, a little bit more on the negative side of what George R.R. Martin thinks about House of the Dragon and things like that. Like, I watched Red Team Reviews or Carmine's video on his breakdown of Not a Blog, and I think he was a lot more positive and someone that was a little bit more, I don't want to say defending, but was giving the benefit of the doubt to the show, where I am not that. I am kind of the complete opposite. I am not defending the show at all. I don't think the show has any excuses. I think, people that make excuses that, the writing stuff, they were supposed to be 10 episodes. Okay, but they had the whole 10 episodes written out before the writing strike. They had to move it down to 8. Okay, well, you already had 8 episodes written out, so it shouldn't have been that hard to then condense whatever they were going to do. And plus, you have to think, in those 10 episodes, the Battle of the Golem was still going to happen in episode 9. So what really changed? Again, budget. It's like, okay, we couldn't have enough budget to have Maelor in the show, but we did have multiple scenes where the dragons are unnecessary to be in them. Questionable. Or just random people repeating scenes. Allison's whole camping trip. Didn't need that. Multiple scenes with the Triarchy stuff in episode 8 that didn't really matter, in my opinion. They're just weird scenes in general. I just don't think the show has excuses. I made excuses for this show pretty much all the way up until the finale for this show, and I'm done. I'm done defending the show. I'm done giving it the benefit of the doubt. I just think when your own person that's overlooking your story, the person that created this world, publicly is criticizing you and putting you pretty much on blast after he hadn't done it for years with D&D. I know all I have to know. I trust George R.R. Martin that season 3 and 4 aren't going to be good. I probably watch them, but I have literally no expectations now. The expectations that I had, George R.R. Martin put a knife in it and said, yeah, no, I'm good. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.